When are we going to stop saying Asian American when we really mean Chinese American? Obviously, there is a lot of overlap between the experiences of different groups of Asian diaspora in America. But, like, I'm very tired of people saying Asian American when they really just mean Chinese American.
I'm glad you're watching. Thank you for stopping by. And thank you for coming back to watch my content. If you're my returning subscriber, I appreciate you. You're all welcome. Let's dive into today's video. What you've just heard previously sound like a simple sentence. I'm tired of hearing people saying Asian American while they actually mean Chinese American. So this is a type of generalization that is causing this diaspora war. Another term, diaspora war, is also looked at as cross-cultural conflict. And the simplest way I can define culture, I would say it's the total way of life of people. It's what they eat, how they celebrate different things, what do they value, what do they dress, how do they dress at particular occasions. And yeah, it's everything that is comprised of the life of those people. So I would say whenever people tend to be brought in or to be included in a culture that is not theirs, or they're being associated with people of a different culture, it's kind of offensive to them. They feel like, how do they want us to lose our identity in this mass? When they're being looked at collectively, some people find it surprising that there's conflict between them, because you'd realize that there'll be clash of culture. People would want them to be together. They would assume that they're supposed to be together while there's these cultural clashes. Everyone don't want to see their culture predominating the other, and this results to clashes and this war, I would say, diaspora war among this Asian community or in America right now. And yeah, people are sharing their experiences. So this video is comprised of different stitches that I put together to show you how serious it is and how do they feel about the whole thing. Yeah, they're explaining their experiences, and I would want you to leave your thought. And I'm glad that you know that you don't support any kind of violence here. Keep your comments constructive, and I appreciate that you stopped by. Enjoy the rest of the video.
These Asians need to learn to stay out of Southeast Asian business. Because why are you, a Chinese woman in finance, calling me a Vietnamese person in ABG? Why are you fucking repeating history? Because East Asians have been calling Viet people and other Southeast Asians ABGs for the longest time, along with ghetto, brown, dirty, sluts. And I take it that you've never had to grow up in the neighborhood that I had to grow up in, where people struggled. People had to do a lot of illegal shit to survive. Count yourself lucky you've never said the wrong thing around the wrong person.
The diaspora wars between black people has a lot to do with ideas that have been given to us from white supremacy, right? And while that may play a role in a lot of the Asian diaspora wars, they seem like they want some blood behind this. Like, they hate each other, bro. We were at a restaurant enjoying ourselves, having a good time with some of the locals. One of the people with my group just casually brought up that his wife was Filipino. At which point, one of the locals who was at the table with us, without missing a beat, just very casually said, I thought you Americans liked your horse clean, you know, like Japanese or something. I think they picked up that we didn't fuck with that joke because all of the Americans went completely silent while the locals were like giggling. After they left, the dude explained that his wife warned him before we even left home that might happen. So he was kind of mentally prepared. She also told him, don't go to Chinese jail. So he was not trying to go to jail for fighting.
I love when other black people find out that diaspora wars is not a black only issue, and that every race of people has a diaspora war, and I find it to be the funniest thing ever. Like, there is a literal reason why when you ask Asian people what's your ethnicity, or you just assume Japanese or Korean, or you assume Japanese specifically, they go off, or they're very specific about why they don't want to do it. Y'all know that Japan colonized so many parts of Asia. Japan had Korea under a regime for years, honey. There's so much history, and there's a real reason why, like, Korean people have a very big disdain for Japanese people as well. There's history. I don't know all the history, so I'm not going to overtalk any issue who can actually define it, but there's a whole... That's why we talk about how Japan has the best PR team when it comes to anime and cutesy kawaii stuff, because Also, I remember, I think I first found out about it when I realized that so in the K-pop group AOA, not AOA, Miss A, one of the girls is actually Chinese. She's not Korean. And she talked about all the hate she got for being a Chinese woman. Woo, the diaspora. Also, that's why when you just say white, that's also the reason why so many people go back and forth about how they're German, they're Italian, they're anything but Anglo-Saxon as the way we know, which is based in being British. Because Britain also colonized all these other places as well. So there's a huge diaspora war about what kind of you are. And it's the funniest thing ever to me. Like, there's so much history, and that's why we only focus on the Black diaspora wars, because it's one of the most prevalent ones, and it is traced all the way back to white supremacy. However, we have to acknowledge what it is right now, that Black people are not the only diaspora that has a diaspora war going on. Please.
It is okay to say something is Chinese American. When I was a child, dynamics and perceptions of different Asian diaspora groups were very different, at least on the end of being Korean. And this may have only ever been me. I don't know if anyone else ever felt this. But I often felt very excluded from, Asian supportive spaces, because all of the focus was on the Chinese American experience. And the Chinese American experience would be called the Asian American experience, and people would exclude you because you hadn't experienced things that were Chinese American but weren't broadly Asian American, because they had assumed that Chinese American meant Asian American. It's a little inevitable because Chinese Americans are the biggest, diaspora group. But can we stop?
I grew up in Guam, which is much more diverse and melting pot-ish than Hawaii. So I had friends from the diaspora. I didn't even know what diaspora was until I went to college in Philadelphia, and I didn't realize that race was so politicized. I didn't join neither of the Korean groups. I joined Penn Philippine Association and Penn Hawaii Club, because that's kind of where I gravitated to with friends and culture. And I used to be jealous of the Asians who came from the Bay Area and seemed so proud and close-knit, but also the East Coast Asians who really felt really preppy and also fit in. So it's very wow that people are having these revelations about the actual toxicities in their only Asian groups, especially when it's just one race.
You guys want to know what's even crazier, which I just thought about? You guys know about how the stereotype is all Asians look alike, even though that's evidently not true. There's so many people in the workplace that I feel are like that. They're not going to directly tell you that all Asians look alike, because hello, that's an immediate report to HR. But you can kind of gauge on who believes in that, because every opportunity that these people get, they will call you by another name, and that other name will usually be the other Asian counterpart on your team. And you're just kind of bro, how are me and the other Asian guy getting confused for each other when we don't even look alike? Mind you, we have completely different names, and every opportunity you get, you want to call me his name. But bro, what?
There have been a bunch of articles and whatnot, I think, kind of calling out diaspora about making associations with the culture of their parents or parents' parents that don't really exist within the culture itself. The characters for this word are made up with this radical and that radical, and isn't that a beautiful metaphor? When in actuality, that doesn't really have anything to do with the word itself and the original culture. And I'm speaking as diaspora, I do agree with that. I don't think that just because your parents or parents' parents or other extended family are from a certain culture means you're automatically gifted with pinpoint accurate insight into this culture. But I do think that this is in itself a part of diaspora culture, if that makes any sense. The nature of being diaspora is that you now have limited access to that culture. You're not in that country, or you're no longer in that country. You're no longer steeped in its history, in its everyday life. You don't have the cultural resources that would have been available to you if you lived in that culture. And I think if you're diaspora who have permanently moved or permanently lived outside of the quote-unquote homeland, you don't have access to it. So you're constantly just hungry and yearning for it. Yeah, it's misguided. So maybe this word doesn't mean that in Chinese or Vietnamese or Thai or Korean or Japanese or Malaysian or Singaporean or Filipino culture. But maybe that word becomes that meaning for Chinese diaspora, Korean diaspora, Japanese diaspora, Thai diaspora, Vietnamese diaspora, Singaporean, you get what I mean? Because I think that the one strong hallmark that it permeates through Asian American culture is the fact that we are grasping at straws for our culture. So maybe like in the act of making a culture that is uniquely ex-diaspora-American or ex-diaspora, dash anywhere, we create symbolism that doesn't exist elsewhere. And maybe we just, I don't know, draw that distinction. In Korea, it doesn't matter that my last name is also the word for something. But here, I can make it mean something and make it a part of my own personal symbology. And like, why not?
There's more Asian people that live out west than they do in any other part of America. If you guys look at Asian American history, you'll see that, Asian Americans typically settled out west when they first came here, and like waves of immigration after that continue to settle out west. You'll notice on the East Coast, Asian Americans live in certain pockets throughout the coast, particularly along or by side metropolitan areas. So places like Massachusetts, Boston, Queens, New York, Bergen County, New Jersey. I forgot what part of Virginia, but it's like near DC. Atlanta, Duluth County has a lot of Koreans. And I think because you see that like East Coast Asian Americans typically live within their own little enclaves, and like, we're very spread out from like, other, ethnic groups and just like, regular American society. We're just like not that known on the East Coast like that. And as someone who grew up in a predominantly Korean town in New Jersey, I feel like I can attest to that, because like when you go from here to going to a 4-year private institution for university filled with, white, rich, Republican people who have most likely never seen an Asian person in their lives. And I don't say this out of ignorance. I say because like it's based on fact. Like people used to tell me like, oh, like I thought you were Chinese because like all the Chinese people in my town were adopted. People used to tell me things like, oh, like when I would go to people's houses to like do group projects with them, and like their roommate would open the door and they would say things like, hey, so-and-so, your Chinese food order is here, assuming that I'm the delivery man. People used to call me all things like, Jackie Chan and like, all these like things from like movie stars, from like, oh, you look like the guy from The Hangover. People used to look at me whenever I would go to parties and like be in spaces where like it's just like there's not a lot of Asian people, and be like, give me that look like, why are you here? Like, what is this Asian kid doing here? Like, shouldn't he be studying in his room? Whatever. Like people used to say stuff like that. I could feel people looking at me from across the room thinking that. And then when I speak to people who are Asian American from the West Coast, they're like, yeah, like people don't really do that here. Like there's a lot of Asians on the West Coast, especially in California. Like we're pretty like, lit out here. Like I just feel like Asian Americans, like they just on the West Coast, they're just more like, they're Asian, and they're like, they don't have to deal with the things that like Asian Americans in other parts of the country do, So
You guys, please go read this article right now. I couldn't eat for days. It's a review of this academic paper, and it introduces the concept of racial melancholia, which is something that I've felt all of my time in the US but couldn't put into words. Racial dissociation, the anxiety that we all feel, and yet doesn't get affirmed in real life because there's no like conceptual framework specific to the Asian American experience. I don't really see discussion surrounding transnational trauma in Asian American activism. Reframes how we think about sacrifice, because is it sacrifice or an alternative narrative for failures and disappointments tied to immigration? And is this self-berating and self-sacrificing a pathology of the Asian culture? I think so. And so all that's left that we have are stories where we wrote ourselves into being. And when I tell you, this article broke me because it really verbalized all the anxieties and failures that I felt by myself, unknowing